They say a warrior only breaks once in his lifetime. Aric Valerius broke the day his brother was executed, and the kingdom cheered for it. The sun rose over the kingdom of Alandor with the same quiet beauty it always had, painting the sky with streaks of pale gold. The morning air was cool, the kind that carried the promise of peace. And on that morning, General Aric Valerius believed peace was still possible. He rode at the head of the 3rd Legion, armor polished, cloak flowing behind him, the silver crest of Alandor embroidered across his chest. Citizens whispered his name with admiration as he passed. Children pointed at him, calling him hero. In taverns and villages, ballads were sung about him and his brother, Lord Darius Valerius, who led diplomatic councils with the same honor and loyalty Aric commanded in war. The Valerius brothers were known as the 2 pillars of the kingdom. But pillars cast long shadows. And in those shadows, envy grows. The capital city, Highcrest, rose in the distance upon its white stone cliff, shining under the morning sun like a jewel of civilization. At its highest point stood the royal keep, home of King Reginald Varon, an aging ruler who once valued loyalty above all else. But age weakens memory, weakens conviction, weakens the ability to see the daggers waiting behind every bow. And one dagger, in particular, gleamed sharper than the rest. Prince Alistair Varon. Ambitious, brilliant, and patient. Where Aric commanded loyalty, Alistair commanded strategy. Where Darius sought unity, Alistair sought control. He had grown to see the Valerius brothers not as pillars, but as obstacles. Aric did not know this, not yet. To him, Alistair had simply grown distant over the years. But Aric did not involve himself in politics. His heart belonged to the battlefield, to the men he led, to the kingdom he protected. And that was why they chose his brother instead. Darius greeted Aric in the great hall when he arrived. "Brother," Darius smiled warmly, embracing him. "You've returned earlier than expected." "The rebels at the southern border were poorly led," Aric replied, removing his gauntlets. "They surrendered without bloodshed. This kingdom has seen enough death." If he could have known the irony of those words. Darius nodded, relief in his eyes. "Good. We must show unity in these times. The noble houses grow restless." Aric raised a brow. Restless? Under father's reign, unity was stable. Darius hesitated before speaking. The king grows weaker. His son grows stronger. Aric's jaw tightened. "Alistair." Darius's silence answered for him. But neither brother understood just how far Alistair's plans had already progressed. That night, the kingdom feasted. Aric sat among soldiers and commanders, laughing, eating, sharing stories of battle. Darius spoke with foreign ambassadors, mediating trade and alliances. Minstrels played. Wine flowed. Hope was alive. And Alistair watched it all from the balcony above, leaning on the stone railing like a hawk studying prey. He smiled. Because when men feel safest, they are easiest to destroy. The next morning, the kingdom awoke to chaos. Darius Valerius was arrested. The charge, treason. The evidence, letters proving he conspired with rebel lords. The witness, a forged confession, sealed with his own family crest. The people were horrified. Aric was furious. He stormed the throne room, boots echoing like thunder. "Your Highness," Aric said, voice shaking with disbelief, "you know Darius would never betray this kingdom. He dedicated his life to its peace. I demand a fair trial." Prince Alistair stepped forward before the king could speak. "A trial has already been conducted," Alistair replied. "Witnesses testified. Evidence was examined. This kingdom cannot risk civil war to protect your brother's reputation." Aric stepped closer, eyes burning. "You forged this. You orchestrated it." Guards stepped between them, swords unsheathed. King Reginald, weak and weary, raised his trembling hand. "It is decided," the king whispered. "The execution is scheduled for sundown." Aric lunged forward, but he was held back, armor clashing, fury roaring in his chest. "Alistair," he shouted, voice echoing through the marble chamber. "You will answer for this." "I swear on every oath I've ever taken." Alistair did not flinch. "Swear all you like, General. Oaths cannot change truth." But truth was the very thing being murdered. The execution square filled with thousands by sunset. They came not out of hatred, but confusion. Fear. Uncertainty. The kingdom had been told that a traitor stood before them. And when kings speak, commoners listen. Aric fought through the crowd, but the square was sealed. Soldiers blocked every path. He could only watch. Darius stood on the platform, wrists bound, but head held high. When he saw Aric, he smiled softly, almost peacefully. "Do not let this kingdom lose itself," he called out. "Justice is not gone. It has only fallen asleep." Aric shouted his brother's name. The drums stopped. The axe fell. The world broke. The crowd gasped. And Aric Valerius fell to his knees. Something inside him shattered, not the part that loved his brother, nor the part that honored duty, but the part that believed justice always prevails. It does not on its own. That night, Aric broke into the royal stables, mounted his warhorse, and rode into the storm. Rain lashed against his armor. Thunder roared. He rode with no destination. Only rage. Only grief. He rode until the kingdom's walls were miles behind him, until the banners of Alandor vanished into darkness. But before dawn, a second figure rode out as well. Prince Alistair. Not to chase him, just to watch him go. Because a dead man never needed to be killed. Aric did not die, but the man he had been did. He disappeared into lands unknown. For years, no word of him returned. Some said he became a mercenary. Some said he became a monk. Some said he wandered as a ghost, haunting battlefields. But the truth was simpler. Aric was waiting. Because revenge is not taken in anger. It is taken in timing. And 20 years is a very long time. Revenge is not forged in fire. It is forged in patience. And 20 years is a very long time to wait. The world beyond Alandor was wide and cruel, and Aric Valerius learned quickly that a man with a broken heart was worth less than a sword made of tin. He had once been a general, a commander of legions, a hero whose name brought cheers. Now he was simply a wanderer with no banner, no brothers, no purpose besides a silent oath whispered in the rain. But an oath alone could not defeat a king. Aric needed power, and power required time. He traveled first across the Iron Pass, a frozen spine of mountains that separated Alandor from the eastern plains. Wolves stalked the cliffs, storms shattered rock, and wind carved the bones of travelers where they fell. Few crossed that path and lived. Aric did. He reached the sprawling steppe kingdoms, where people lived on horseback and war was as common as breathing. He joined no army, pledged to no chief. Instead, he watched. For 6 months he observed how the eastern riders fought. They did not stand in shield walls like Alandorian infantry. They moved. Arrow volleys fell like rain. Feigned retreats turned into sudden ambushes. A single wrong step could doom an entire army. Aric studied not only the tactics, but the rhythm of battle. War was not force. War was timing. One evening, on a plain of tall golden grass, he approached the war camp of the steppe chieftain Turalf Khan. The guards attempted to drive him away, but Aric stood firm. "I seek no rank," he said. "Only to learn." Turalf Khan, amused, agreed to test him. Not in a duel, not in a contest of strength, but in command. He gave Aric 50 riders and ordered him to break a fortified caravan defending a narrow ravine. Aric studied the formation, the terrain, and the supplies they carried. The caravan's defense seemed unbreakable, which meant they expected a head-on attack. Aric did the opposite. He set the steppe grass ablaze. Smoke rolled into the ravine. Horses panicked. Men abandoned their positions to save the carts. And when the defenders broke formation, Aric struck, not as a wah, but as a whisper of wind, cutting through their confusion. The caravan fell without a single casualty. Turalf Khan laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and gave him a new name. The General of the Silent Arrow. Aric stayed with the riders for 2 years. He rode in wars that were not his, learning how flexibility could defeat strength. But strategy alone was not enough. A kingdom was not won by cavalry. A kingdom was won by people. From the steppe he traveled south to the Red Coast, where cities of marble clung to cliffs like birds' nests. There, battles were not fought by armies, but by merchants, counselors, and diplomats. Words were sharper than steel. A single rumor could bring a noble house to collapse. Aric learned to speak carefully, to watch before responding, to listen before deciding. He worked as a guard in a merchant fleet, crossing seas and walking markets filled with foreign tongues. He ate meals among scholars, sailors, thieves. He learned from all of them. He learned how kingdoms wrought. He learned how power pretends to be noble. He learned that loyalty is the most expensive currency, and most men cannot afford it. Years passed. His hair grew longer. His face hardened. The young, proud general slowly faded into someone quieter, colder, deliberate. But one year in particular shaped him more than the rest. In the 11th year of his exile, Aric found himself in the militia of the free city of Galdmere, a coastal fortress constantly at war with its inland neighbor, Voltern. The city needed commanders, and though Aric hid his identity, his experience was obvious. Galdmere's council appointed him as tactician during the siege of Redwater Valley, a strategic river crossing bordered by cliffs. Voltern held the high ground. Galdmere held the lower banks. Every assault from below failed. The river ran red daily. Aric walked the battlefield, studying the land. The cliffs were impossible to climb. The river was swift. Voltern's archers controlled every approach. Victory seemed impossible, which meant the enemy believed they could not lose. And belief was a weakness. Aric gathered Galdmere's infantry into the valley one morning, shields raised, advancing as they had countless times. Voltern's archers loosed volleys. The sky darkened with arrows. But Aric ordered the infantry to fall back before reaching the cliff base. It happened again the next day. And the next. And the next. Voltern laughed from the high cliffs. They believed Galdmere had no strategy at all. Then, on the 5th day, Aric changed everything. When the infantry advanced, they did not retreat. But neither did they attack. They raised shields and stood still. A wall. Their bodies blocked the wind. Dust and river mist settled thick across the field, ing the valley hazy. And that was when the hidden cavalry, waiting at the edge of the valley, charged. Not forward, but up the river. The horses splashed through shallow currents, concealed by dust and mist, until they reached a concealed slope worn by years of flooding. A path so narrow, only one rider could climb at a time. But one rider at a time was enough. When the cavalry appeared on the ridge behind Voltern's archers, the high ground advantage vanished. The archers broke. The infantry scattered. The cliffs were claimed. And Galdmere roared victory. The Council of Galdmere offered Aric lands, wealth, and rank. Aric declined all of it. You could rule here, one councillor insisted. Aric only answered, I do not seek to rule. I seek to prepare. Yet even with knowledge, skill, and patience, one thing remained missing. He needed people who would follow him. Not for gold, not for glory, but for loyalty. So Aric traveled north into the Greywood, where mercenary companies roamed like wolves. He joined a smaller band called the Ironbinders, known not for their strength, but their discipline. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Mavar, valued one thing more than coin: honor. Aric served under him, learned from him, fought beside him. In time, Mavar asked, Why does a man like you fight without a banner? Aric answered truthfully, My brother was executed for treason. He was innocent. The murderer wears a crown. Mavar said nothing for a long time. Then he replied, Then one day, we will follow you. Aric did not ask. He did not recruit. He did not promise. But warriors remembered. And slowly, quietly, over the years, a network formed. Steppe riders who still respected his mind, merchants on the Red Coast who owed him debts, scholars who preserved records others tried to erase, mercenaries who valued loyalty over gold. They all knew one thing. When Aric Valerius called, they would answer. Year 17. Word reached Aric at a campfire on the edge of the Greywood. King Reginald was dead, and the new king was Alistair Varon. The world did not freeze. The wind did not stop. The fire did not flicker. But Aric did. For a long time, he stared into the flames. He did not speak. He did not move. But the oath inside him whispered, Not yet. Year 19. Rumors began to spread across trading caravans, tavern halls, and border towns. The kingdom of Alandor was suffering. King Alistair ruled not with justice, but fear. Taxes bled the people. Rebellions sparked and were crushed. The noble houses whispered. The army strained. And the kingdom that once prospered under unity now trembled under greed. The time was nearing. Year 20. Aric stood upon a ridge overlooking the border of his homeland. The wind carried the scent of pine, smoke, and memory. His hair was streaked with gray. His face carried lines carved by hardship and patience. He no longer wore a general's armor. But he no longer needed to. Because a man who commands loyalty does not require a title. A rider approached behind him. Mavar, older, missing one eye, but unbroken. He dismounted and bowed his head, not as a subordinate, but as a brother. When you return, Mavar said, you will not return alone. From the tree line, shadows moved. One by one, figures emerged. Riders, swordsmen, scouts, diplomats, spies, healers, smiths. Hundreds, then thousands, all men and women shaped by 20 years of war, trade, knowledge, and patience. They did not kneel, they stood beside him, because Aric did not need worship. He needed allies. Aric exhaled slowly. 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of preparation. 20 years of wounds that never healed. Now, the waiting was over. We do not return for vengeance alone, Aric said quietly. We return for the kingdom my brother believed in. The kingdom we once served. The kingdom that still lives in the hearts of its people. We return for justice. Mavar nodded. And the king? Aric's eyes hardened, cold as winter iron. For him, Aric said, we return last. He turned his horse toward Alandor. And together, they rode. Hook. When Aric returned, no one recognized him. But every corner of the kingdom still whispered his name. It was late autumn when the people of Alandor first heard rumors of a marching host approaching from the northern wilds. Travelers spoke of horse banners bearing no sigil. Of armor that did not shine, but was worn, scarred, and real. Of soldiers who did not sing, or boast, or drink loudly, but moved like a single living organism. Not conquering, not raiding, returning. At first, the rumors were ignored. The kingdom had other problems. Taxes soared, hunger spread, bandits multiplied, nobles gathered armies behind closed gates. The once golden kingdom now felt tired, hollow, and brittle. King Alistair Varen ruled from the throne of Highcrest, and his shadow fell across every village and every hearth. But shadows only control until something brighter steps into view. And one crisp morning, the people of Northgate Village heard the echoing thunder of hooves. They rushed to the palisade walls, expecting raiders. They did not see raiders. They saw discipline. Rows of cavalry approached in perfect formation, moving as though guided by one mind. Mercenaries did not march like this. Bandits did not stand like this. This was an army. No banners, no symbols, only a single rider at the front. His cloak was dark and travel-worn. His armor simple. His hair tied back, streaked with silver. His posture. Calm, balanced, effortlessly commanding. The villagers whispered among themselves. Is it a general? No army dresses like that now. Maybe they serve the king. No, not anymore. The king's army looks starved these days. The gatekeeper, hands shaking, stepped forward. Who leads this host? The rider dismounted slowly. His voice was quiet, even, steady as memory. I am Aric Valerius. The villagers fell silent, completely silent. A silence so deep it seemed to pull the world inward. Aric Valerius had died 20 years ago. Or so the kingdom believed. Or so the king needed them to believe. A child whispered, barely a breath. The general, from the old songs. Someone dropped to their knees. Then another. Then another. Not out of worship. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Legends do not die. They simply wait. Aric did not tell Northgate who he was nor why he had returned. He simply requested water, rest, and a quiet field where his army could camp. And the village, without being asked, reaped grain, baked bread, and gathered every unused blanket they could spare. Not because Aric demanded loyalty, but because he had earned it long before. 2 days later, word reached Highcrest. King Alistair stood in the council chamber when the messenger knelt before him, trembling. My king, Aric Valerius has returned. The room froze. Alistair's expression did not change. His eyes did not widen. His breath did not catch. If anything, he smiled. Has he? He said softly. The council erupted. Voices arguing. Plans forming. Fear rising. Aric leads an army. He must be stopped before the nobles rally behind him. He is a hero to the people. You cannot simply. Alistair raised a hand. Silence returned. Aric Valerius is nothing but a story from another time, the king said. And stories are only dangerous when left to grow. He stepped toward the window overlooking the capital. Send our fastest riders. Spread one message across the kingdom. He turned. Aric Valerius is a traitor, and any who support him will be executed. The council bowed, but Alistair's eyes were not calm. They were afraid, because he knew Aric better than anyone. Aric did not return for glory. Aric did not return for the throne. Aric did not return for the people. Aric returned for him. Aric moved south, slowly, methodically. He did not storm fortresses. He did not raid towns. He did not issue proclamations. He simply arrived, and everywhere he arrived, people remembered. They remembered how safe the roads once were. They remembered how fair taxes once were. They remembered what loyalty once felt like. And so villages joined him. Farmers, hunters, retired soldiers, smiths, healers, not as soldiers of war, as citizens of a cause. But I see new loyalty alone could not win a kingdom. To challenge Alistair, he needed one thing. Proof. Proof that Darius was innocent. Proof that treason was forged. Proof that the king was a liar. Proof that could only be found in Highcrest. But Aric also knew Highcrest was not just a fortress of stone. It was a fortress of memory. And memories came with ghosts. Highcrest was not the first city he entered. He approached a smaller city first, Solhaven. Solhaven was once known for its libraries and healers. But under Alistair's rule, it suffered famine and heavy taxation. The city guard was undermanned and overworked. The walls stood strong, but the people inside were starving. A direct assault would turn civilians into casualties. Aric refused that. He would not trade one tyrant for another. Instead, he studied the city. He watched how grain carts entered. He observed guard rotations. He tracked the movement of merchants. His army hid in the nearby forest, silent and invisible. Finally, he sent a rider under a white flag. Not a diplomat, not a warrior, a blacksmith. A simple, honest man named Reynold, who had once repaired swords in Highcrest's royal forge. A man who carried no titles. A man the people could trust. Reynold rode into the city and spoke plainly to the starving crowds. Aric Valerius has returned. He does not come to conquer. He comes to free. If you open your gates willingly, no blood will be spilled. The people argued. Some hoped. Some feared. Some remembered songs sung decades ago. Some remembered the execution square. But hunger persuades where speeches fail. The gates opened at dawn. Aric's army entered without a single drawn blade. The people lined the streets, watching him, searching his face. He looked older. Yes, the face of time was there. But the back was still straight. The eyes still sharp. The dignity untouched. A young woman stepped forward, clutching a loaf of bread baked from the last of her flour. Her voice quivered. General, will we be safe? Aric dismounted, kneeling so he was at her height. His voice was steady. Not yet. He did not lie. Safety comes after the storm. And there will be a storm. The woman swallowed hard. But we are with you, she said. Aric nodded once. That was all the oath he needed. Word spread like wind over wheat. Aric Valerius does not take. He does not burn. He frees. And the kingdom began shifting, like ice cracking in spring. Not loudly, but inevitably. Aric used Solhaven wisely. He reopened its granaries. He re-established supply routes. He retrained worn city guards. He met with elders, scholars, craftsmen. He did not replace leaders with soldiers. He strengthened leaders who already belonged to the city. Because Aric did not want a kingdom of obedience. He wanted a kingdom of trust. But victory was never going to be bloodless. King Alistair responded swiftly. Not with messengers. Not with envoys. With steel. An army of 15,000 marched from Highcrest, led by Lord Commander Vero, Alistair's most vicious and loyal hound. Vero did not believe in mercy. He believed in fear. He surrounded Solhaven on the third night after Aric's arrival. His horn sounded at dawn. Aric Valerius. His voice thundered across the valley. You stand accused of treason. Surrender, and your followers will be spared. Aric stepped onto the city walls. His cloak lifted by the wind. His army silent behind him. The people watching from windows and rooftops. Aric did not shout. He simply spoke. 20 years ago, my brother was executed without trial. The kingdom was lied to. If I surrender now, I betray not only him, but every man, woman, and child who believes in truth. Vero laughed. A pretty speech. But speeches do not win wars. No, Aric agreed. But soldiers do. He raised his hand. The ironbinders moved into formation. Steppe riders flanked the eastern ridge. Local militia guarded the narrow streets. Archers lined the walls. Aric had studied Varro's army. Heavy infantry, long halberd lines, war wagons shielding archers, powerful in open field, weak in tight ground. Aric let Varro advance. The road to Solhaven narrowed between two stone-grain storehouses. Varro's formation compressed. His halberds lost reach. His cavalry stalled. And Aric struck. Not from the front. From above. Archers rained volleys from rooftop lines. Militia surged from alleyways, shields locking, controlling space. Steppe riders circled the outskirts, cutting off retreat. Varro's army had marched to overwhelm. Aric turned the city into a trap. The battle was not long. It was not glorious. It was not sung in ballads. But it was decisive. Varro, cornered and bloodied, glared up at Aric in the aftermath. "You could have ruled this kingdom," he spat. Aric's voice was steady. "I am not here to rule." Varro bared his teeth. "Then what are you here for?" Aric looked toward Highcrest. "For truth." And Varro understood. This was not rebellion. It was reckoning. That night, Solhaven lit torches along every wall, every window, every street. Because hope shines brightest in darkness. Aric stood alone on the city ramparts, staring south. Behind him, Mavar approached. "You know the king will not rest now," Mavar said. "I know. He will send everyone he has." "I know." Mavar looked at him for a long time. "Then our storm begins." Aric exhaled softly. "No," he said. "The storm has already begun." When Aric returned, no one recognized him. But every corner of the kingdom still whispered his name. 20 years had passed since Aric Valerius rode away from Alandor under storm-filled skies. 20 years since the banners of the Valerius house had been torn down, burned, and forgotten. 20 years since his brother's blood stained the execution square. Yet the kingdom had not forgotten everything. Some wounds do not fade. Some names refuse to die. And the name Aric Valerius still echoed in taverns, old garrison halls, and in the songs of soldiers who remembered when honor was not just a word spoken by kings, but a promise upheld by men. The capital of Alandor, Highcrest, was no longer the proud city Aric once remembered. What once gleamed with white stone and sunlight now lay choked under banners dyed in deep crimson, King Alastair's colors. The markets were quiet. The people spoke softly. Fear lingered like fog. At the city gates, guards in heavy armor scanned the crowds. They were not looking for criminals. They were looking for desperation, because desperate men became rebels. A long column of travelers, merchants, pilgrims, and refugees waited to enter the city. Among them, on a black horse, rode a man cloaked in a dark woolen mantle. His posture was straight. His gaze was steady. His presence felt like stone and winter. His beard was trimmed. His hair touched his shoulders. His eyes were quiet, not with peace, but with memory. Aric Valerius had come home. But no one recognized him. Not yet. As Aric waited in line, a guard barked at an old farmer carrying sacks of grain on a donkey. "Tax is double this week," the guard snarled. "King's orders." The farmer's voice trembled. But my harvest barely kept us fed. "If you take that, we'll starve." The guard shoved him. The old man fell. The grain spilled. Aric did not move at first. He simply watched. Once, those guards would have served under him. Once, they would have feared dishonor more than punishment. Once, the kingdom had values. Not anymore. Another guard raised a spear to strike the farmer. Aric dismounted. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply caught the guard's wrist mid-swing. The guard froze. The crowd went silent. Aric spoke with a low, controlled voice. "That man is no threat. Let him go." The guard laughed. "And who are you to command the king's soldiers?" Aric lifted his eyes. There was no anger, no heat, just the gaze of a man who had survived storms other men would have died in. Someone who remembers what this kingdom once was. The guard tried to pull back, but could not. Aric's grip was iron. The second guard stepped in, hand going to his sword. Aric didn't give him a chance. He twisted the first guard's wrist, disarmed him in one fluid motion, and drove the spear into the ground, not a strike, just a statement. The movement was simple. efficient. The movement of a trained commander, not a brawler. The guards stepped back automatically. Not because they recognized his face, but because their bodies recognized his discipline. Aric released the guard and stepped back. "Go," he said to the old farmer. The old man stared in disbelief, then fled with his donkey. The guards said nothing. No one dared speak. Aric mounted his horse again. He entered the city without another word. Highcrest had changed. The great banners once bearing the Lion of Alandor now bore the serpent sigil, King Alistair's personal emblem. A symbol of power. A symbol of control. A symbol of fear. Aric rode through silent streets, past shuttered windows and soldiers on every corner. Even the air felt heavier, as if the city itself was holding its breath. He passed the Hall of Records, where his brother once mediated disputes. He passed the training yard, where he once taught swordsmanship to boys who dreamed of glory. He passed the execution square, where his world had ended. He did not slow. He did not look away. He simply rode on, and the whispers began. Who is that? He carries himself like a noble. No, like a soldier? No, like a commander? A group of older soldiers, men with gray in their beards, stopped what they were doing as he passed. Their eyes widened. One whispered, "No, it cannot be. He's dead." Aric did not look back. The royal keep loomed above the city, perched on its high white cliffs. Soldiers lined its walls, alert, ready. The drawbridge lowered only during noon court, when King Alistair received petitioners. Aric arrived just as the courtyard filled with nobles and guards. Gasps spread like wildfire, not because they recognized him, but because he did not bow. No one approached the king's court without kneeling. No one. Aric simply walked forward. A captain shouted, "State your name before the throne." Aric stopped. The hall quieted. King Alistair sat upon the throne, crown gleaming, robes heavy, expression calm. He studied the cloaked figure. Recognition flickered, but disbelief held it back. Aric removed his cloak. The hall froze. Time itself paused. His face was older, lined, weathered, but his eyes were unmistakable. Cold, steady, unbroken. King Alistair slowly rose from the throne. Aric Valerius. A storm passed through the hall. Guards reached for weapons. Nobles gasped. Whispers turned to shock. Aric bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the place where everything began. "I have returned," he said, voice firm but quiet. "Not as a traitor, not as a fugitive, but as a son of Alandor." Alistair forced a thin smile. "We believed you dead." Aric met his gaze. "I was. Oh. NCE." Something inside the king twitched. Fear? Memory? Guilt? Aric spoke again. "I have seen kingdoms rise from dust and crumble into sand. I have seen armies break under silence. I have seen men mistake fear for loyalty." He took one step forward. "And I have returned to ask only one thing." The hall held its breath. "What?" the king replied slowly, "would that be?" Aric's eyes hardened like drawn steel. "The truth." The hall went cold. The king laughed, softly at first. "Truth? After 20 years, you come to request truth?" Aric shook his head. "No, not request." He raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. "I come to reveal it." Gasps. Steel. Shouts. Chaos. Alistair's voice cracked like a whip. "Seize him." But soldiers hesitated, not out of loyalty to Aric, but because fear was no longer enough to control them. Aric turned and walked away. Not captured, not stopped, not touched. He had planted the first seed. Rumor would do the rest. A ghost had returned, a brother wronged, a kingdom shaken, and in taverns across Alandor, soldiers spoke quietly that night, "The general has returned." Not yet to fight, not yet to overthrow, but to wake the kingdom. Step 1 of justice was complete. Some wars are not fought with swords. Some are built in silence, over years, inside the hearts of those who never surrendered. The city of Astoria had always been described as beautiful. Aric remembered it as a place where banners fluttered in the wind and children ran through flowered courtyards, where bells rang from high towers and the air smelled faintly of baking bread and juniper. He remembered it warmly. He did not recognize it now. What had once been gold had turned gray. The banners were faded. The market stalls were quiet. Laughter was rare. The city's heart had not stopped beating, but it beat softly, cautiously, like a wounded animal that had learned not to trust the sound of footsteps. 20 years. 20 years of a kingdom under the rule of the man who had exiled him. 20 years of fear. Aric entered the city riding like a man who belonged nowhere and everywhere. His cloak was plain. His armor was hidden. His beard was trimmed, but his eyes looked like winter had taken residence inside them. No one recognized him, but whispers followed him anyway. Not because they saw him, but because they felt him. Some people carry silence like a shadow. Aric carried history. He didn't go to the palace. Of course he didn't. The palace was where predictable men went to die. He rode instead through the narrow streets, taking turn after turn by instinct, memory guiding him more accurately than any map. He wasn't thinking. His body simply remembered the path. He stopped before a stone manor with ivy climbing its walls and iron lanterns hung by its gate. Alina's home. He dismounted and stood there for a long time, unmoving. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. None of them felt like this. He knocked once. The door opened not by a servant, not by a guard, but by Alina herself. She looked exactly as she had been described by rumor, elegant, composed, graceful in a way that seemed effortless. Her hair was braided in the style of the high courts, her posture perfect, her expression calm. But her eyes were the same. Fire restrained by discipline. Alina did not gasp. She did not falter. She did not reach for him. She simply said, "You took longer than I expected." Aric swallowed once. "I had to survive first." She stepped aside. "Then come in. We have work to do." No tears. No trembling hands. No melodrama. Two people who had lost everything simply stood together again. Inside her home were books, maps, coded letters, wax seals, and messenger ciphers. Not the decorations of a noblewoman. The tools of a strategist. "You built this," Aric said quietly. "No," Alina corrected. "You built it. I only kept the fire from dying after they took you." She poured him water, not wine. Because wine is for celebration. And this reunion was not joy. It was preparation. Aric drank. Slowly. His hands were steady. Hers were not. She covered the tremor by adjusting a candle. A small moment. The kind that says everything. "You heard what happened to me," Aric said. Alina's voice remained level. "I heard lies. So I spent 20 years ensuring I would one day hear the truth from your own mouth." Aric looked at her then. Really looked. The world had taken much from him. But not her strength. "Alina," he said softly, voice rough, "they destroyed everything I was." "No," she answered. "They tried. But I never let them bury your memory. I made sure the people still whispered your name. I made sure the soldiers remembered who trained them. I made sure your legend grew teeth." He stared at her in silence. And for the first time since he returned, something cracked inside him. Not pain. Not grief. Hope. A small, dangerous, flickering hope. Because hope was what made men march into impossible wars and believe they could win. Alina stepped closer, her voice lower now, controlled but trembling at the edges. "You are not the man they exiled. You are something far more dangerous. You returned not as a soldier, but as a symbol." "Symbols don't win wars," Aric said. "No," Alina agreed, "but they start them." She moved to the table, spreading out a map of the kingdom. Pins, strings, territory marks, every rebellion cell, every disloyal commander, every possible crack in the emperor's rule. Na had prepared for this moment for 20 years. Aric realized something then. He had spent 2 decades surviving. She had spent 2 decades planning. "Alina," he whispered, "what did my exile do to you?" She did not look up from the map. "It taught me patience." Night came. Candles burned low. They spoke of allies, armies, strategies, networks, but not of the past. Not yet. Only when the moon was high and the city was quiet did Alina finally sit, exhausted, across from him. There was a pause. A silence that had waited 20 years to exist. "You never stopped loving me," Aric said quietly. Alina didn't look away. "I did. Many times. But love is not something you bury once. It keeps growing back like roots under stone." He exhaled. A sound that carried 2 decades of weight. "Alina, I am not who I was. I don't know if I can be him again." She leaned forward. "Good. Because the kingdom doesn't need who you were. It needs the man who survived." But survival had a cost. And Alina saw it clearly. Because when she reached out and placed her hand over his, Aric did not react. He did not move closer. He did not pull away. He did not break. He simply did not feel. The war had carved the warmth out of him. Elena withdrew her hand slowly. Not hurt, just understanding. You will feel again when it is time, she said softly. Aric shook his head. I didn't come back for love. I know, she answered. You came back for justice. She stood. He stood. Two soldiers now, not lovers. Elena's voice changed, becoming steel. We strike when winter ends. Aric nodded once. When winter ends, he repeated. And then, without embracing, without a tear shed, without words wasted, they walked together toward the table where the war waited for them. Side by side, like they had always been. Like they would be. Until the end. Revenge is not the triumph of the living. It is the inheritance of the dead. Winter ended, not gently, like in the stories. It cracked and shattered, like ice breaking under the weight of something too heavy to bear. Armies moved before the snow had finished melting. Quietly at first, then openly. Villages that had whispered Aric's name now shouted it. Smiths reforged old armor bearing his crest. Farmers became soldiers again. Veterans who had once served under him returned, limping, scarred, older, but still loyal. The kingdom did not rise like flame. It rose like memory. Because memory is stronger than fear. Elena's networks carried orders like blood through veins no one knew existed. Supplies were positioned, rations stored, messengers moved only at night. No speeches, no banners. Revolutions that intend to win do not announce themselves. When the first city fell, it fell without a scria. At dusk, its gates opened. At dawn, its watchtowers flew Aric's sigil, the black stag. Word spread not like rumor, but like judgment. By mid-spring, half the kingdom stood with him. The emperor called him a traitor. A deserter. A ghost clinging to a past that no longer existed. He underestimated ghosts. Ghosts do not fear death. They remember it. The final march toward the capital took place beneath a sky of rolling storm clouds. It was not a large army. It was not polished. It had no war drums, no golden armor, no polished shields. But every soldier in it would follow Aric into the mouth of the underworld itself. Not because he asked. Because he never asked. A general beloved is followed. A general wronged is obeyed. Aric rode at the front, silent, helm tucked beneath one arm, cloak snapping behind him. His face was older now, sharper, carved by years of cold nights and long regrets. But his eyes burned, not with hope, with certainty, the kind of certainty that ends worlds. The capital rose before them, white stone walls, high towers, a fortress meant to break sieges. Aric did not plan a siege. He planned entry. Elena had planted the method 20 years ago. A hidden aqueduct gate, blocked with iron only from the inside. A guard captain her network had slowly, carefully, quietly converted over decades. One signal. A single lantern in a tower window. That was all it took. A kingdom fell not by force, but by patience. Inside the city, chaos turned like a wheel. The emperor's men formed ranks. Church bells rang warning. Citizens locked their doors. But the streets did not resist. They watched. History was unfolding. No one interfered with history. Aric walked into the palace alone. No army. No shield wall. Just a man returning to the place where his life had been stolen. Two guards moved to stop him. He looked at them. Nothing more. Recognition struck both like a blow. They lowered their spears. Some names are heavier than steel. The throne room was lit by tall white windows, banners of crimson and gold hanging heavily from vaulted ceilings. The emperor stood at the far end, old now, crown heavy, shoulders slightly bent. Age had not softened him. It had sharpened him to a blade so thin it could break at a touch. He knew who walked toward him. He did not pretend not to. He laughed, not mockingly, not cruelly. Weary. You should have died in the storm, the emperor said. Aric stopped 20 paces away. I did. Their voices echoed. The emperor's fingers curled on the arm of the throne. You come to reclaim your honor. No, Aric said. I come to end yours. Steel rang. 2 swords drawn. No guards moved. This was not a battle. It was a reckoning. The emperor was still skilled. His blade was fast, precise, honed by decades of ruthless discipline. Aric did not match him with speed. He matched him with inevitability. Every strike landed like it had been waiting 20 years to happen. No wasted motion, no shouted fury, just grim, terrible purpose. Steel met steel, sparks, steps, breathing, then a slip, a single mistake. The Emperor faltered. Aric drove his sword through him. There was no scream, only a slow exhale, like a man finally releasing something he had held too long. The Emperor fell. Aric stood over him. He did not speak. There were no words that could add to this moment. Justice is silent. The throne room doors opened behind him. Boots ran. Armor clattered. Voices shouted his name. But Aric was already falling. The Emperor's blade, in his final failing swing, had pierced Aric deep beneath the ribs. A wound that does not kill immediately, but always kills. Aric looked down at the blood and almost smiled. Of course. Revenge always asks for payment. And it always collects. He walked out of the palace, sword in hand, blood marking the white marble steps behind him. People gathered in the square. Soldiers, citizens, children, merchants, elders. No one spoke. They simply watched him. A king without a crown. A victory without triumph. Aric looked at them, at the kingdom he had reclaimed, at the streets he had defended once, and bled for now. He realized something. He had never wanted to rule. He only wanted the truth. And the truth had cost him everything. His knees weakened. He sank to the ground. The sound of hooves thundered in the distance. Elena was riding. Fast. Desperately. Too late. Always too late. Aric's vision faded. Snowflakes began to fall, though winter had already ended. The world always remembers its coldest stories. He exhaled once. Not pain. Not fear. Just release. And as he died, the kingdom held its breath. Elena arrived moments later, horse lathered, cloak windswept, eyes blazing like a storm-breaking stone. She saw him on the steps. And she did not scream. Not because she did not feel, but because the grief was too large for sound. She knelt beside him, not touching him. Touching would break something inside her that could not be repaired. She simply bowed her head. Not to the fallen man. To the cost. To the memory. To the war fought in silence. And the love that outlived both of them. The kingdom would take her name next. Not as queen. As regent. Guardian. The one who ensured Aric's victory lived beyond him. But in the quiet rooms of the palace, late at night, when candles were low and the world was silent, she would sit and remember the man who returned from exile with winter in his eyes. The man she waited for. The man she lost twice. End of story. Tragic. Noble. Unforgettable.